The defense of the Pusan Perimeter, conducted from August 4th to September 18th, 1950, stands as one of the most significant and harrowing operations in the history of the United Nations Command. It represents the culmination of a desperate 2-month retreat following the North Korean People's Army invasion of South Korea on June 25, 1950. The Korean War began with a sudden and massive mechanized assault by 10 divisions of the NKPA, catching the Republic of Korea Army in a state of total unpreparedness. The ROK's army, consisting of approximately 95,000 men, faced the NKPA force of 135,000 equipped with Soviet T-34 tanks and heavy artillery. Within 3 days, Seoul fell, and the South Korean government was forced to flee southward. The United States, acting under the auspices of the United Nations, committed ground forces from the 8th United States Army, stationed in Japan. However, the post-World War II drawdown had left these units understrength, poorly equipped, and largely composed of green units with little combat experience. The initial commitment of American forces, beginning with Task Force Smith of the 24th Infantry Division, was intended as a strategic bump in the road to buy time for the mobilization of greater forces. The early battles at Osan, Chonan, and Daejeon were characterized by humiliating retreats and heavy casualties. The 24th Infantry Division was nearly destroyed at Daejeon, its commander, Major General William F. Dean, eventually becoming the highest-ranking American prisoner of war. By the end of July, the remaining UN and ROK forces were compressed into the southern tip of the peninsula, centered on the vital deep-water port of Pusan. By August 1, 1950, Lieutenant General Walton Bulldog Walker, commander of the 8th Army, ordered all UN forces to withdraw behind the Naktong River. This rectangular enclave, measuring approximately 100 miles north to south and 50 miles east to west, became known as the Pusan Perimeter. The Naktong River provided a natural barrier to the west, while the rugged mountainous terrain of the north offered defensive high ground. General Walker, a protege of General George S. Patton, understood that further retreat would be catastrophic. If the NKPA captured Pusan, the UN would lose its primary logistical entry point, effectively ending the war in a communist victory. On July 29, 1950, Walker issued his famous Stand or Die order to the officers of the 25th Infantry Division. We are fighting a battle against time. There will be no more retreating, withdrawal, or readjustment of the lines. There is no line behind us to which we can retreat. There will be no Dunkirk. There will be no Bataan. A retreat to Pusan would be one of the greatest butcheries in history. We must fight until the end. We will fight as a team. If some of us must die, we will die fighting together. I want everybody to understand we are going to hold this line. We are going to win. The order was not merely rhetorical. It established the tactical reality of the campaign. The UN forces were forced to utilize a defense on a wide front where divisions were spread over 35-mile frontages, doctrinally impossible but necessitated by the lack of manpower. Walker exploited his advantage of interior lines, shuttling mobile reserves across the perimeter to plug gaps faster than the NKPA could shift their forces around the exterior. The soldiers defending the perimeter faced an environmental adversary as formidable as the NKPA. The Korean summer of 1950 was marked by 100-degree Fahrenheit temperatures, high humidity, and stifling dust, followed by torrential monsoon rains. Clean water was virtually non-existent at the front. Soldiers were forced to wring water out of rain-soaked blankets or drink from stagnant rice paddies, leading to epidemic levels of dysentery and heat exhaustion. The terrain was dominated by jagged ridges and deep valleys. To defend these hills, soldiers had to carry heavy equipment up near vertical slopes, only to find the soil too hard to dig effective foxholes. Resupply and casualty evacuation were often conducted by human porters, the A-frame carriers, or light liaison planes dipping low over the peaks. The defense of the perimeter during August 1950 was defined by 4 major North Korean thrusts designed to breach the line and capture Pusan or Daegu. To secure the southern approaches to Pusan, General Walker organized Task Force Keen, the first major UN counteroffensive. Composed of the 25th Infantry Division, the 5th Regimental Combat Team, and the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, the task force attacked west from Mason toward Chinju on August 7th. The offensive met fierce resistance as the NKPA 6th Division ambushed the column in the hills. While Task Force Keen failed to reach Chinju, it succeeded in checking the NKPA 6th Division's advance on Pusan and stabilizing the southern flank. Personal accounts from this sector describe the lid-has-blown-off atmosphere, where units like the 35th Infantry Regiment found themselves in constant close-quarters combat. The Naktong Bulge was a semicircular bend in the river about 30 miles south of Daegu, where the NKPA 4th Division crossed the Naktong on August 6, 1950, creating a 1,000-man bridgehead. This penetration threatened to sever the Pusan-Daegu supply line. The U.S. 24th Infantry Division struggled to contain the breach, leading Walker to commit the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade as a fire brigade. The Marines, supported by Marine Aircraft Group 33, launched a series of violent assaults on key terrain, most notably Obongni Ridge. The combat was intimate. North Korean troops often wrestled the weapons from American soldiers as they fired. By August 19th, the NKPA 4th Division had been decisively defeated, losing nearly all its equipment and most of its personnel in the river crossing and subsequent retreat. As the pressure increased on Daegu, the temporary capital and HQ of the 8th Army, a critical engagement developed in a narrow valley northwest of the city. Defended by Colonel John Mike Michaelis and the 27th Infantry Wolfhounds, this valley became known as the Bowling Alley. For several nights, the NKPA 13th Division launched armored and infantry attacks down the valley. The T-34 tanks would fire flat trajectory shells that screamed down the road, bouncing off the hillsides like bowling balls. Michaelis coordinated an integrated defense of Pershing tanks, 3.5-inch bazookas, and heavy artillery. Lieutenant Colonel Gus Terry's 8th Artillery Battalion, utilizing extra shells gained through a moonlight requisition of unguarded flat cars in Pusan, provided a barrage that broke the North Korean armor. On the eastern flank, the NKPA 5th and 12th Divisions attempted to drive through the coastal mountains. This sector was primarily the responsibility of the ROKA 1st Corps, including the 3rd and Capital Divisions. The fighting at Pohangdong was chaotic, with the town changing hands several times. The UN exploited its naval supremacy, using the 7th Fleet to provide massive naval gunfire support that decimated North Korean units attempting to bypass the mountains along the coastal road. The strategic maps and troop movements of the Pusan perimeter only partially tell the story of the defense. The true nature of the campaign is found in the testimony of the soldiers who held the stand-or-die line. Private First Class Edward Gregory Jr. was a BAR gunner with Company B, 23rd Infantry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Division. His testimony captures the unnerving realization of being cut off and surrounded during the September offensive. All day the battle raged on. The enemy surrounded our position. Thousands more crossed the Naktong River. The company was cut off. We were being fired on from all sides. There were 20 of us left, all that remained of B Company. Surrounded and pinned down, we fired at the enemy from different holes. A bugle call cut the air. It was a banzai charge. To our rear, on the high ground, the enemy fired down into us. From the other direction, the enemy charged. I fired my BAR. I hit some of them. I heard men scream. I threw my last 2 hand grenades. I fired at them until the bolt slammed home. In my trench, I did not know if I was the only American left alive. Gregory was wounded and captured during a hell march where North Korean captors hit the wounded with rifle butts and threatened execution for those who slowed the pace. The memoirs of General Paik Sun-yup, From Pusan to Panmunjom, offer a poignant look at the South Korean perspective. Paik, then only 29 years old, was tasked with defending the northern approaches to Daegu with the ROK 1st Division. For us in the ROK Army, December 3, 1950, lives as the day when our dream of national unification by force was dashed forever. My memory shall never expunge the scenes of Korean soldiers sacrificing their lives to place explosives on enemy tanks in the first days of the war, soldiers who fought with grenade and bayonet and died in the rugged mountains within the Pusan Perimeter. These heroes will always live in my heart. Paik famously led his men in a counterattack at the Tabudong front, telling them that if he retreated, they should shoot him. His division was one of the few ROK units that held its positions with the same tenacity as American divisions, often outfighting the NKPA in the mountain terrain. A British contingent arrived in late August, bringing a different mindset to the perimeter. One officer, John, recalled his arrival at an airfield under shell fire while carrying golf clubs and a tennis racket, items he had been told by his colonel were appropriate for showing the flag. I remember asking my colonel, Colonel Andrew Mann, whether or not we would be going to merely show the flag in Japan, and he said, "By all means, John. Take your golf clubs and tennis racket." I got out of the plane on arrival. Much to my amazement, found the airfield was under shell fire. I remember a large black sergeant came along and said, "We've got a right lot of Charlies here." I just threw them in a ditch and I never saw them again. This lighthearted arrival was quickly overshadowed by the brutal reality of the front. During the assault on Hill 282 on September 23rd, a misplaced napalm strike by U.S. aircraft decimated the British 1st Battalion, Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, resulting in 60 casualties in 2 minutes. Raymond McDaniel of the 9th Infantry 2nd Division described the sheer intensity of the North Korean Great Naktong Offensive on August 31st. All hell broke loose. Without warning, the enemy attacked. Enemy mortar barrages alternated with infantry assaults. Survivors later estimated there were about 20 separate infantry attacks, all repulsed. Dead and dying were in almost every foxhole or lay just outside. McDaniel's account highlights the resilience of Task Force Manchu, which held Hill 209 against repeated waves of NKPA soldiers, despite having no water and only 1 can of sea rations per man. The Battle of the Pusan Perimeter was won as much through tonnage as through tactics. Pusan Port served as the vital center of gravity for the UN command. Unlike the NKPA, whose supply lines stretched hundreds of miles and were under constant air attack, the UN forces had short, efficient interior lines. The 8057th Provisional Port Company and the later 2nd Logistical Command transformed Pusan into the most active logistical hub in Asia. During the month of August, while the perimeter was under its greatest pressure, port operations expanded to handle over 1 million tons of material monthly. This included the arrival of medium tanks, M26 and M46s, and vast quantities of ammunition that allowed UN artillery to maintain its barrage. While roads in Korea were largely unpaved and turned to mud during the monsoons, the Korean National Railroad remained the primary mover of heavy equipment. The rail lines were operated by Korean crews under the supervision of the 3rd Transportation Military Railway Service. This allowed General Walker to shift entire regiments from one side of the perimeter to the other in less than 24 hours, responding to NKPA breakthroughs with overwhelming local force. By August 15, 1950, the U.S. Army was in desperate need of replacements. Through an informal agreement between President Rhee and General MacArthur, the KATUSA, or Korean Augmentation to the United States Army, program was born. Civilians were literally recruited off the streets of Pusan and integrated into American squads. The first KATUSAs reached combat units by mid-August, though they initially lacked training and faced a significant language barrier. They provided essential manpower. In the words of one veteran, they were hastily trained South Korean soldiers, used to cover vacancies in squads that were down to half strength. By the end of the war, the KATUSA program had become a permanent and successful fixture of the ROK-US alliance. By the end of August, the NKPA was reaching its breaking point. Supply shortages were acute. The North Koreans were running out of bullets, bodies, and beans. Despite these losses, they managed to field a final offensive force of 98,000 troops, risking everything in a simultaneous 5-point assault starting August 31st. The NKPA 2nd, 4th, 9th, and 10th Divisions launched a massive effort to cross the river and penetrate toward Pusan. The U.S. 2nd Infantry Division bore the brunt of this assault, with the NKPA slicing the division in two and breaking nearly all communications. The 1st Provisional Marine Brigade was once again committed as a reserve, launching attacks on September 3rd that pushed the NKPA back several thousand yards. During the September offensive, Master Sergeant Travis E. Watkins of the 9th Infantry led a small task force on Hill 209. Surrounded and under constant mortar fire, Watkins repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to gather ammunition and rations from dead North Koreans. Even after being paralyzed from the waist down by a bullet, he continued to fire, killing 6 enemy soldiers who were attempting to overrun his position. His actions and those of Private First Class Joseph R. Ulay, who also repeatedly left the perimeter to gather supplies, were instrumental in the task force's survival until they were finally forced to evacuate on September 4th. The Namji-ri Bridge was a vital link between the 2nd and 25th Divisions. On September 8th, it was mistakenly bombed by American F-82 aircraft, destroying an 80-foot center span. This logistical disaster forced the UN command to rely on emergency airdrops and rubber raft ferries to keep the front-line units supplied during the height of the North Korean breakthrough. The successful defense of the Pusan Perimeter was the result of 3 converging factors: North Korean operational errors, UN material superiority, and the tenacity of the stand-or-die defense. The NKPA made a critical strategic mistake by spreading their forces too thin along the 140-mile perimeter. Instead of concentrating their forces in one place to achieve a decisive breakthrough, they launched a series of poorly coordinated thrusts. Furthermore, their logistics were catastrophically vulnerable. By September, the NKPA was suffering from massive losses. Only about 20,000 troops eventually retreated north following the collapse of the front. The UN command maintained total air and naval supremacy. The 5th Air Force acted as a mobile artillery for General Walker, striking NKPA concentrations before they could launch attacks. At sea, the 7th Fleet provided a protective shield, allowing for the safe delivery of millions of tons of supplies and the use of naval gunfire to secure the coastal flanks. Despite the heavy casualties, many UN units developed a fierce pride. The 27th Infantry Wolfhounds, for instance, became legendary for their speed and vicious attacks. Their motto, Nec aspera terrent, obstacles do not frighten, defined the spirit of the perimeter. Units forged deep bonds in the foxholes with American GIs, ROK soldiers, and British Fusiliers fighting and dying side by side. The defense of the Pusan Perimeter was never intended as a permanent state of affairs. Its primary strategic goal was to fix the North Korean army in place while General MacArthur prepared a decisive counterstroke. On September 15, 1950, the 10th Corps launched an amphibious landing at Incheon, far behind North Korean lines. The landing at Incheon severed the NKPA's supply lines and threatened their entire rear area. On September 16th, the 8th Army launched a general breakout from the Pusan Perimeter. The breakout was as violent as the defense. Units like the 21st Infantry Regiment crossed the Naktong at daybreak on September 19th, meeting stiff initial opposition before the North Korean front finally collapsed. Within days, the NKPA was in a total rout, fleeing back toward the 38th parallel. The Battle of the Pusan Perimeter was the pivotal moment of the early Korean War. By holding the line during the long summer of 1950, the UN and ROK forces prevented the total conquest of South Korea. The stand-or-die order of General Walton Walker, though controversial and costly, ensured the survival of the Pusan port and paved the way for the liberation of Seoul. The human cost was staggering. For the veterans, the perimeter was a place of stifling dust, heat, soaking rains, aching legs, and exhausted bodies. It was a war of limited preparation, where the time taken to relearn the lessons of World War II needlessly cost lives. Yet the stand at Pusan demonstrated the potential of international military cooperation. Today, the United Nations Memorial Cemetery in Busan serves as a final resting place for many who fell in August and September 1950, a testament to the international resolve that refused to let South Korea fall. This defense remains a core study in operational art, logistics, and small unit leadership. It serves as a reminder that even when pushed to the last corner, a determined force, supported by short supply lines and air superiority, can hold the line against overwhelming odds and turn the tide of history.